1840, May the 1st. The first adhesive stamp. The penny black stamp was the world's first adhesive postage stamp used in a public postal system. It was first issued in the United Kingdom on May 1, 1840, but it was not valid for use until May 6, 1840. The stamp features a profile of Queen Victoria based on a sketch of her aged 15. The process of designing the penny black began with an open competition, inviting designers and engravers to envisage an image that would prevent forgery and reuse. Around 2,600 entries were received, but only 4 ideas from Treasury competition essays of 1839 were chosen, and its designers were awarded £100 each. The penny black was designed by Henry Corbould, a respected artist of the time who was also responsible for designing the portrait of Queen Victoria that appears on the stamp. (1862) May 5. The Battle of Pueblo. This is celebrated in Mexico as Cinco de Mayo, a national holiday in remembrance of the Battle of Pueblo in 1862, in which Mexican troops under General Ignacio Zaragoza defeated the French army. The Battle of Puebla was fought on May 5, 1862, between the Mexican army and the French forces sent by Napoleon III to establish a French satellite state in Mexico near Pueblo de Los Angeles during the Second French Intervention in Mexico. It was fought between the army of the Liberal government, headed by Benito Juarez, and the French forces. The Mexican army, made up of hastily assembled peasants, was outnumbered and outgunned by the French army, which was considered the world's best army at the time. Despite the odds, the Mexican army was able to delay Napoleon III's plans for Mexico. Facts about the battle. The Mexican forces, led by General Ignacio Zaragoza, was largely outnumbered by the French forces, but they achieved an unlikely victory in the battle. The French forces were headed for Mexico City, but their route was blocked by the fortified city of Pueblo. The French general Charles Latreille Lorenges ordered a frontal assault up the steep Cerro de Guadalupe against the Mexican position, which was fortified by a ditch and a brick wall. The Mexicans, under General Ignacio Zaragoza, repulsed the attackers, who lost about 1,000 men and then retreated to the coast. The victory was significant because it was an inspirational event for Mexico during the war, and it proved a stunning revelation to the rest of the world, which had largely expected a rapid victory for the French army. Consequences of the battle. The victory filled the government of Benito Juarez with high hopes. Though the victory did not stop the French from eventually occupying Mexico City, it served as a symbolic victory for the Mexican government, and while not very important to Mexico from a military standpoint, it represented Mexican resolve and a bravery in the face of an overwhelming foe. The victory is celebrated in the city of Pueblo, which largely recognizes the victory through parades, reenactments, and other festivities. The day is also celebrated in many parts of the US, as Mexican Americans can show patriotism towards their roots and traditions. (1945) May 8, VE Day. The surrender. Well, there were actually 3 major surrender signings. The first was on May the 5th to Field Marshal Montgomery by the northwestern German armies. The second on May the 7th, 1945, when German Colonel General Alfred Jodl signed Germany's surrender on all fronts in Reims, France. After the signings of the Reims Accord, Soviet Chief of Staff General Alexei Antonov expressed concern to the Senior Headquarters Allies Expeditionary Force that the continued fighting in the east between Germany and the Soviet Union made the Reims surrender look like a separate piece. The Soviet command wanted the act of military surrender, with certain additions and alterations, to be signed at Berlin. To the Soviets, the document signed at Berlin on May 8, 1945, represented the official legal surrender of the Third Reich. But the Berlin document had few significant changes from the one signed a day earlier at Reims.
Yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m. at General Eisenhower's headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and of Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Forces and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command. Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight, Tuesday, the 8th of May. But in the interest of saving lives, the ceasefire began yesterday to be sounded along all the fronts.
Celebrations. The news of Germany's surrender was met with relief and joy by millions of people across the world. In towns and cities, people marked the victory with street parties, dancing and singing. Tens of thousands of people filled the streets of cities around the Western world. There was also a massive celebration in Paris and London and New York. However, it was not the end of the conflict, nor was it an end to the impact the war had on people. The war against Japan did not end until August 1945, and the political, social and economic repercussions of the Second World War were felt long after Germany and Japan surrendered. What about the Germans? The news of Germany's surrender has a significant impact on the daily lives of German citizens. The country was in ruins, and much of the civilian population was homeless, subsisted on inadequate rations, and could be only marginally accommodated by what remained of the relief services. The influx of refugees fleeing the advance of the Red Army in Germany's eastern provinces strained this fragile net to the breaking point. The Nazi power structure appeared determined to lash out against as many perceived enemies as possible before its demise, and many atrocities against their own citizens were committed by the SS and Gestapo during the final days. The survivors of the city's garrison surrendered on May 2. The immediate aftermath. The majority of German cities, crossroads and bridges had been destroyed by Allied bombing raids, but the bulk of Germany's rural areas and suburbs had escaped relatively unscathed. Whilst the majority of soldiers on the Allies' side treated the Germans reasonably well, there were many incidents of retaliation against Axis soldiers and their citizens. This was particularly true as the Soviets secured their areas of control. They no longer felt compelled to respect property and relished the opportunity to make Germans suffer the same discomforts they had endured for years. The end of the war did not bring an end to the problems for those who remained. People faced the challenge of building lives for themselves and what was left of their families and communities with scarce resources and restricted freedom, and in a climate of distrust and grief. The women suffer. The women of Berlin had a number of brutal trials to face, one more awful than the next. Millions of women were widowed as a result of the conflict, many of them with children to care for. Many women had lost their only means of financial support, either because their husband or family had perished, or because their means of employment had been destroyed or shut down. Worse still, the occupying armies were cruel towards the defenceless native population. Forced intercourse became a tragic part of reality for German women, with millions of women being victimised at the hands of occupying soldiers. Rebuilding. As troops returned home and the Western occupying forces began to implement plans to help rebuild their area of control into a new democratic Germany, rule and order replaced the chaos of the first months. Germany and Berlin were divided in 4 sectors controlled by the main allies: the US, Britain, France and Russia. The 3 Western allies quickly combined their sectors, and the beginning of new but a divided country had begun.